My name is Ramya. I'm the Citizen Science Coordinator for the Citizen Science Project, the Key Biscayne Citizen Science Project. We're sponsored by the Key Biscayne Community Foundation. Today we're having Kelly speak for Miami Waterkeeper. It's mostly an introduction to Miami Waterkeeper today, but this is the first in a series of 3 throughout the summer. We'll have one more next month and then another one the month after. And basically the Ambassador Series is everybody kind of understand environmental stewardship, civic engagement, how to talk to your legislators, how to understand like policy, what you can do to like, affect policy, who to talk to, and just what issues arise and like how you can make a difference. We also are hoping for a little bit of incentive to get you guys to come to all 3. At the end, we have a sign-up sheet in the back. If you want to make sure and sign in every time you come to one of these Ambassador Series events. At the end, if you come to all 3, we're going to give you one of our brand new reusable bags that the Citizen Science Project just ordered. And then we have some other like goodies that are going to be there that are from Miami Waterkeeper and the Citizen Science Project. And there are different things, obviously a reusable bag, so hopefully you don't use plastic bags, reusable straws, just things like that. Just we'll talk about that throughout the series, but just to get you started. And with that, I will hand it off to Kelly to get started with Miami Waterkeeper.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Ramya. My name is Kelly Cox. I'm the Staff Attorney and Program Director at Miami Waterkeeper. I see a lot of familiar faces here. How many of you were here with us last summer for our trainings? Great. Thank you so much for coming back. For some of you, this might be a little bit of a refresher. Today we're going to be talking about ecosystem challenges in Miami and in Biscayne Bay in particular, but we're also going to be talking about some solutions and what we can do as engaged and active citizens to protect these resources which are so critical to our clean water economy in South Florida. Miami Waterkeeper is a Miami-based nonprofit that's dedicated to providing swimmable, drinkable, fishable water to everyone in South Florida. We also operate in Broward County, but we focus on a few key issue areas. We use community outreach, education, scientific research, and legal advocacy to achieve protected marine ecosystems, clean water as it pertains to drinking water and surface waters. You get the idea. We have a very multifaceted approach, and we think it's really important to combine all of these things in order to achieve really a resilient South Florida that has clean water and healthy marine ecosystems. So what is a waterkeeper? Well, we're part of what's called the Greater Waterkeeper Alliance. Today, there are more than 300 waterkeeper organizations all across the globe. But this movement really started back in the 1960s along the Hudson River. A group of commercial fishermen started noticing that pollution that was entering the Hudson River from the municipal sewage system and from an industry along the river was causing contamination in the fish. It was causing the fish to die. It was causing a depleted fishery overall. And these fishermen built their livelihoods on the fishery, right? And they supported their families with the fishery, and their whole income depended upon it. So they needed a way to address this pollution. And so for the very first time, these commercial fishermen got together and they said, we need to find a solution for this pollution problem. What should we do? Some of the fishermen were a little bit more coarse, and they decided, well, we're going to form a militia, and we're going to go, destroy these plants. But other fishermen took a different route, and they started using community education and legal advocacy to address the pollution problem. So the group of fishermen got together and they brought one of the very first citizen suits under the Rivers and Harbors Act, which is a very old statute that protects our waterways in the United States. And they were successful too. They won one of the very first citizen suits under the Rivers and Harbors Act, and they won the equivalent of $5,000, which they used to purchase a patrol vessel. And that vessel they used to patrol the Hudson River and continue to report incidences of pollution, and they also continued to bring lawsuits. Since then, this methodology has caught on like wildfire throughout the United States and beyond its borders. In the 1990s, the Waterkeeper Alliance was formed to formalize this sort of strategy to addressing pollution problems. And then, of course, in 2010, your Miami Waterkeeper was formed. We were formerly known as Biscayne Bay Waterkeeper, but we realized that so many of the issues that affect Miami and Biscayne Bay are much broader than just the bay itself. So we felt the need to expand to be able to incorporate those issues. And as I mentioned, today we have over 300 waterkeeper organizations all around the globe. So today, we're going to talk about a few things. First, we're going to do a very cursory overview of Biscayne Bay. Some of you folks might be from South Florida, you might not be, you might be visiting, you might be residents of Key Biscayne, you might not be. So we're going to go over Biscayne Bay, what it is, why it's important. The next step is to look at environmental challenges that Biscayne Bay is facing. What are some of the most immediate, most pressing threats that the bay is facing today? Next, we'll take a look at future outlook. What are some future issues that we might be facing? What are some future solutions that we could be working towards as a community? And then finally, we'll discuss what you can do to help and how you can get involved to make a difference. But first, let's talk about Biscayne Bay. Here you'll see a map of Biscayne Bay. You can tell it's a bay because it's protected by a series of barrier islands, right? One of which is where we are right now in Key Biscayne. This series of barrier islands really protects our coastline, and it creates an actual ecosystem, the bay itself. It's a shallow water estuary. An estuary means that it's a body of water where fresh water and salt water are mixing together in the ocean. Now, estuaries are very critical in terms of ecosystem functioning because they are some of the most productive ecosystems in the world. And in our region, they're tremendously important as well. The freshwater flow from the inland areas brings nutrients and supports natural vegetation growth in our coastal areas and underwater as well. This freshwater mixture contributes to a very easy habitat for juvenile fish and juvenile species to live in because salinity is often very limiting for species survival. So some of these infant marine life that we see growing up in Biscayne Bay and eventually moving offshore with things like our sea turtles, for example. Some of our shark species live inshore, as well as our commercially viable fish species. We also have lush seagrass beds in the bay, which provide really great habitat and protection for a lot of these juvenile species. You might know that we also have a variety of macrofauna in Biscayne Bay, including the great hammerhead shark, our West Indian manatee, the Atlantic bottlenose dolphin, and our wonderful green sea turtles, among others. Just offshore of Biscayne Bay, we have our Florida Reef Tract. And the Florida Reef Tract runs up north of Palm Beach County all the way down past the Florida Keys and into the dry Tortugas. Now, the Florida Reef Tract is comprised of corals. You might know that corals, some of them anyway, are protected species under the Endangered Species Act. Can somebody tell me why you think that corals are protected species? Some of them are protected species. They're endangered. Well, they're threatened or endangered, that's exactly right. Part of the reason that they're suffering right now is because of ocean acidification, warming ocean temperatures, increased mechanical breakage and damage from boat anchorings and groundings, as well as things like increased frequency and intensity of storms. So we're really concerned about coral reefs in Miami and all the way up the coastline, and we focus a lot of our efforts on there. But corals also provide a variety of really important ecosystem services to Miami, not the least of which is that they protect our shores from storm surge and sea level rise. I like to say that our coral reefs act as a speed bump to a lot of these major waves that are coming in from offshore, and they really tame them and prevent large amounts of storm surge from hitting our shorelines during hurricanes and other major storm events. Another critical ecosystem in Biscayne Bay is our seagrass ecosystem. We have three primary types of seagrasses in Biscayne Bay, although there are many, many more species. You can see the difference here, and we also have a lot of species that depend on seagrasses for protection and for habitat, such as our seahorses. Seagrasses are also an essential food source for some species of fish and algae and other critters that live in the seagrass, and they also serve a very important purpose of sequestering carbon and cycling nutrients. And finally, we have our mangrove ecosystem. We have 3 native species of mangroves, although scientists have recently discovered that South Florida is experiencing invasive mangrove species for the first time. Our 3 native species of mangroves are red mangroves, which live closest to the shoreline. They're very distinguishable based on their prop roots. They look like they're climbing into the water. The next level up is our black mangroves, and they can handle a certain amount of inundation, but a little bit less than our red mangroves can. Black mangroves are easily distinguishable based on their roots, which come straight out of the ground. And they're pretty easy to see. And then finally, white mangroves are our most upland species of mangrove. All of our mangroves serve to stabilize our shoreline and circulate nutrients throughout Biscayne Bay into the seagrass beds and then offshore to our coral reefs. Mangroves, as you can tell, also create a very, very valuable habitat for a lot of different species, including shorebirds that might roost in mangrove trees, crabs, snails, and a variety of different fish species which might live in the roots of the mangrove, particularly the red mangroves. You can tell that the roots go all the way down into the ground and are also above the water, and so that creates a very safe habitat for various different species to live in. But unfortunately in Miami, these are more like the shorelines that we see. So we have a problem in Miami with a lack of living shorelines. Our natural ecosystems in Miami used to be dunes and mangroves and very healthy seagrass beds and coral reefs. But this has declined over the years with urbanization and increased human impact on this region. So I think that this picture is really demonstrative of the fact that we have these species that are depending on this really important ecosystem in the bay, but we have very limited natural habitat for them to thrive in. So now we're going to transition into environmental challenges that Biscayne Bay is facing. The first issue we'll discuss is changes in freshwater flow. Then we'll talk about pollution problems and finally climate change impacts. So first I'm going to give an overview about freshwater flow in South Florida. If you've ever read the book The Swamp, it's a great book, I strongly recommend it. We talk a lot about changes in freshwater flow over time. We've all heard the saying, drain the swamp, and that's essentially what we did in South Florida because it used to be primarily Everglades in coastal wetland ecosystems. So in this first section of this graph, you can take a look and see that this is the historic flow. Historically, Lake Okeechobee was very saucer-shaped. And during the rainy season every year, Lake Okeechobee would overflow, and all of that fresh water from Lake Okeechobee would trickle down south very slowly through the River of Grass, out through the Gulf of Mexico, down through Florida Bay, and out through Biscayne Bay as well. Over time, people started to realize that the land below Lake Okeechobee was very fertile, and it made really good farming land. So people started to occupy that area and build their lives around that area. Unfortunately, when people moved below the lake, they were also very unhappy when the lake flooded every year. So as a result, they built a dike around the lake to prevent the flooding. And various engineers over decades and decades started to channelize the flow of Lake Okeechobee out to the east and west through 2 rivers, rather than sending the water south as it was naturally meant to be. This has caused a dramatic impact on South Florida, and particularly on Biscayne Bay and Florida Bay, which are suffering dramatically from salinity increases. These are ecosystems which were historically estuarine, which means that they were supposed to have brackish water, a mix of salt and fresh water. Today, Biscayne Bay's salinity is at the same level as the Atlantic Ocean and sometimes higher because of the rate of evaporation in the bay due to it being a shallow water lagoon. This can absolutely changes the ecosystem dynamics of the bay. Historically, the bay used to have freshwater crawfish in it and a variety of other different species like oysters that used to inhabit this ecosystem because the bay was fresh enough. Today, we don't see any of those species anymore because salinity is absolutely limiting for them and they're not able to survive. So looking at the picture on the far side, we see a future plan. So we're still operating under this channelized system of water flow from Lake Okeechobee, but with a little bit more inclination towards ecosystem restoration and sending the water south. This is something that is currently up for debate amongst a variety of experts and politicians and state agencies and federal agencies, among scientists and everyone else that's involved in this process. But we sincerely hope that in the future, Biscayne Bay will start to receive the fresh water that it really, really needs in both quantity and in quality. So as I mentioned, I touched on this lightly, but changes in freshwater flow indicate changes in salinity and nutrient levels in the bay. So plants and animals that live in the bay can try to deal with ups and downs of salinity and nutrient levels, but they can only survive at a general stasis. Because organisms can't adapt quickly to rapid changes in their environment, it's really important to keep the bay at or near historic salinity levels. Next up, we're going to discuss pollution problems. So, as with any urban area in the United States, Miami has its fair share of pollution problems. The catch is, we are located right on the shores of Biscayne Bay, this beautiful ecosystem and habitat for so many species and for recreation and tourism. So our issues associated with pollution are sometimes exacerbated. Water quality and habitats in parts of the bay, including canals and rivers, definitely show signs of human impact. The most common problem that we're seeing in Biscayne Bay is the excessive amounts of bacteria and nutrients associated with sewage contamination. So you might know that many places in Miami-Dade County are still on septic systems. Those places that are not on septic systems are on sewer lines. Unfortunately, our sewer lines in some places are more than 60 years old. And to date, those sewage lines are buried under Biscayne Bay, and they go out to the sewage treatment plants where they're eventually disposed of 3 miles offshore. Now you might venture to guess that exposure to salt water over time corrodes these pipes. And then coupling that with the fact that historic engineers from decades ago could not have anticipated the rapid population growth of this region and the demand on the water infrastructure that it would cause, results in unpermitted sewage leaks and discharges. Additionally, we see a very major problem with fertilizer and nutrient loading. So not only do the nutrients from sewage bacteria impact Biscayne Bay and cause things like swim closures or swim advisories and beach closures, but we also see issues associated with fertilizers and other nutrient runoff into the bay. So think about all the golf courses that you see in Miami. All those golf courses, including the one here in Crandon, are right near Biscayne Bay, and they all use fertilizer on that nice lush green grass. Unfortunately, when it rains, a lot of the times that fertilizer runs off into the nearest storm drain, and our storm drains are directly connected, for the most part, to Biscayne Bay, where that water empties out untreated into the bay. So fertilizers in natural amounts are perfectly fine for our ecosystem. And by fertilizers, I mean naturally occurring nutrients. A naturally occurring nutrient would be something like a mangrove leaf dropping into the water and decaying over time, and then those nutrients from the mangrove leaves flowing offshore. That's naturally occurring. What we're putting onto our nice lush green grasses in Miami is not naturally occurring. Lush green grass is not native vegetation in Miami. And as a result, all of that fertilizer is eventually ending up in Biscayne Bay. So what's the big deal? We're putting a bunch of nutrients in Biscayne Bay, Kelly. That sounds totally fine. Nutrients are good for you. Unfortunately, excess nutrients are bad for Biscayne Bay. They contribute to things like algae blooms and die-offs of certain resources, including our coral reefs, as well as the algae blooms can contribute to a limited dissolved oxygen in the water, which makes it difficult for even fish to survive. Just up north in like Martin County and St. Lucie County a few summers ago, you might have seen the algae blooms that they had. which contributed to massive fish die-offs. It's not just unsightly, it's unsanitary, and it causes a huge impact to their tourism industry and their economy. So that's something that we're trying to avoid here in Miami-Dade County. Unfortunately, within the past decade, we have had several unprecedented microalgae blooms, particularly in areas that are nearby major users of fertilizer, like the Coral Gables waterway, for example. As I mentioned, this stormwater runoff is a problem. These are some examples of stormwater pipes that we have in Miami-Dade County. These are outfall pipes, and you can see how they dump directly into the waterways. And this is, again, an issue not just because of the nutrients and the fertilizers and herbicides and things that are in your grass or in your lawn, but it's also an issue because all the stormwater runoff takes everything with it off of the streets and directly into the bay. So this includes things like persistent organic chemicals and pollutants that are found in car oils or materials from industrial sites and those types of things. So these are things that are really concerning to us at Waterkeeper because they have tremendous impacts for human health and also environmental health. These are some examples of algae blooms, and you can see them even from a satellite view and from space. Algal blooms have occurred in the last decade. And they've caused significant harm to the seagrass community. Right now, our seagrasses near the Julia Tuttle are actually experiencing an unprecedented die-off. And so that benthic community is being completely devastated, and scientists are currently investigating the causes, but many scientists believe that it's directly attributable to the amount of nutrients that we're adding to the water in that area. So I think this video is really great because it shows how marine debris can be trapped in our mangrove ecosystems. And as you can see, there's a variety of different type of debris in there. We've got styrofoam cups, we've got plastic materials, we've got all sorts of things. You can even see the microplastics degrading in there. And marine debris is problematic for a number of reasons. Marine debris not only is unsightly and aesthetically displeasing, it also creates a very gnarly smell for those of you who have done beach cleanups. It can also be harmful to animals, right? The wildlife and the different species that occupy these ecosystems. We see a lot of incidences of entanglement. I'm sure you've all seen the viral video of the turtle with the straw up its nose. These are very real issues that we're seeing in Miami-Dade County. And on top of that, scientists are still in the process of studying exactly how marine debris, particularly petroleum-based products, are bioaccumulating in the fish that we eat and the fish that we consume. And this is where it becomes really problematic because an unsightly marine debris problem very quickly transforms into a public health issue because those petroleum products are bioaccumulating toxins in these variety of species of fish, and that can contribute to a variety of issues for personal health, not the least of which is the potential for exposure to carcinogenic materials. And finally, the sort of elephant in the room amongst all of these things is climate change. So I say that because our stormwater runoff issue is exacerbated by climate change, right? So the increased amount of flooding and saltwater intrusion that we experience is going to increase the amount of stormwater that's running off into Biscayne Bay. It's going to increase the frequency of septic fields flooding. It's going to increase the likelihood of brownfield sites being inundated and toxic chemicals flowing into the bay. So these are very pressing issues that are exacerbated by climate change. In the same way, marine debris and our plastic consumption really furthers the impacts of climate change in a way that we each individually need to be accountable and take steps to address. But some of these issues that we're going to talk about today include climate change contributes to changes in ocean temperature and ocean acidification, which threatens a variety of species and organisms that thrive in the bay. We all are vaguely familiar with sea level rise issues and storm surge and flooding, as well as interior flooding, which some of you may have experienced, caused from the water table getting too high. So this is a wonderful graphic that we found of somebody depicting sea level rise in Miami Beach. They say, Miami Beach is going to be the next Venice. Isn't it lovely? We'll all just have our gondolas and we'll paddle around and it'll be so quaint and beautiful. We can snorkel on Collins Ave. Unfortunately, the reality is that floodwaters are a lot dirtier than that, and they contain a lot of different chemicals and pollutants. This is a more accurate picture of what sea level rise will look like in Miami Beach. This water will be not clear, probably not beautiful. It will contain all of the debris from the streets. It will contain all sorts of other pollutants that might be on the streets or in the ground, above the ground, and so on. And this is something that we're experiencing now in Miami, and I think we all need to be very aware of it. The folks on Miami Beach are intimately aware of this issue, as are some of the folks in Coconut Grove and other areas where inundation is happening more regularly, particularly during king tides. So this photo right here is just from a regular rainstorm. It's not from a hurricane or anything like that, and you can see the flooding that's occurring on the beaches is totally unprecedented. Within the next probably 80 years or so, the federal agencies, including the Army Corps of Engineers and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, estimate that sea levels in South Florida will rise up to 6 feet. So this is something that certain municipalities are taking steps to address immediately because they have very pressing and immediate concerns about this. And this is an example of a road elevation project in Miami Beach. You also might know that they have installed a variety of stormwater pumps to pump the water out. And I get the question a lot of, well, are we just going to keep innovating around this problem? Are we going to address the issue at the heart of it? And that depends, I think, greatly on political will and the will of the community. But right now, Miami Beach is taking steps to try to innovate around this very persistent problem. I also want to take a moment to talk about our drinking water. How many of you know that our drinking water comes from an aquifer below the ground? Great. So we have one of the cleanest drinking water aquifers in the country here in South Florida. Our drinking water comes from the Biscayne aquifer, which is a freshwater aquifer that's, I want to say, millions of years old. It's so clean because we have under our very feet a bedrock which is made of limestone, and limestone acts as a natural filter for water that filters down through our water table down into the aquifer, and over many, many years, and over time that water is cleaned to such an extent where it's nice and fresh and readily available for drinking. Unfortunately, our drinking water faces a number of threats as well. Our drinking water is threatened by saltwater intrusion. So as the seas continue to rise, the saltwater lens pressure from the oceans starts to combat the freshwater lens pressure in our groundwater. And that saltwater lens pressure in some instances takes over the freshwater lens pressure. And as a result, we see contamination of the aquifer. So a great example of this is just recently in Coral Gables, a few months ago, they had to start moving several of their drinking water wells. And the city found this out because they were watering the grass in one of their parks, and the grass kept dying. So finally they went in and they tested the water, and it was completely salty. So this is an issue that we're already facing in Miami, and that municipalities are having to deal with. Additionally, apart from natural threats to our drinking water, we have a lot of non-natural threats, or man-made threats to our drinking water too. A great example of this is through our sewage disposal process. So as I mentioned earlier, we have 3 sewage treatment plants in Miami. One near Alita River State Park, one here in Virginia Key, and one down by Black Point Marina down south. The 2 northern plants use an ocean outfall system to treat the water and pump it offshore. The Southern District plant down by Black Point actually uses a system of deep well injection to deep well inject partially treated human waste into the ground, into an area called the boulder zone, which is meant to be a confining layer of rock below our aquifer. Unfortunately, this plan is not entirely foolproof. And in fact, we've already had leaks from the sewage treatment process down through various levels of our aquifer, including our superficial aquifer, the Biscayne, which is our drinking water aquifer, and the Floridan aquifer, which is the brackish water aquifer right below the Biscayne. As maybe some of you have heard, the ocean outfall system is going to be decommissioned within the next few years because ocean outfalls, again, are pumping nutrients and partially treated sewage offshore, just about 3 miles, coincidentally very near where our coral reefs are. So that is going to be decommissioned, and the county right now is in the process of trying to decide what it is going to do with its wastewater instead. Unfortunately, one of the top picks for wastewater is deep well injection, and in fact, the Virginia Key plant recently installed some pilot deep well injection facilities right here on the island. So that's a cause for concern, and that's something we're working on at Waterkeeper too. Another issue that our community is facing is Turkey Point Nuclear Power Plant. How many of you are familiar with Turkey Point at all? Great. Turkey Point is one of my favorite topics. So for those of you who don't know, we have a nuclear power plant that generates electricity for South Florida and communities that live down here. It's uniquely situated between 2 national parks, as you can see from this map. We've got Everglades National Park to the west and Biscayne National Park to the east. And in fact, Turkey Point is just barely carved out of Biscayne National Park. Turkey Point is exceptionally unique because it relies on a system of cooling canals. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with nuclear power generation, it essentially operates like a glorified steam engine with a nuclear core. So the steam generated by the nuclear core turns the turbine, which generates electricity, and eventually that steam needs to be cooled off. In a traditional nuclear power plant, they cool it off using a system of cooling towers, like you might see in The Simpsons. In South Florida, we have the only system of cooling canals in the entire world. So they're meant to act like a radiator to cool off that really hot cooling water. Historically, the canals used to dump right out into Biscayne Bay, as you can see from this canal right here. Fortunately, some scientists back in, I believe, the 70s caught hold of this, and they said you can't be dumping this really salty, contaminated, radioactive water into Biscayne Bay. It's contributing to a massive seagrass die-off, and it's harming our ecosystems. So they blocked off that canal, and then they created this cooling canal system, which again is meant to be a closed system. Unfortunately, as we just talked about, the cooling canal system is unlined, and beneath the cooling canal system is porous limestone bedrock. So as you might imagine, that water gradually migrates both east and west through the groundwater. So the final picture, all the way on this side, you can see this is the green dots are drinking water wellheads. The orange is indicative of a hypersaline plume that is generated by the nuclear power plant, units 3 and 4 to be exact. And you can tell that the hypersaline plume has been impacting and moving at the rate of more than a foot a day. And this hypersaline plume is dangerous to our drinking water supply because once it infiltrates our drinking water supply is then contaminated. And very recently, FPL has been instructed to install a series of pumps to help pump out the hypersaline plume. Unfortunately, we don't know that that's a system that's never been tested, and we don't really know the efficacy of it yet. We're hopeful that it works, but it seems like it's pretty far gone at this point. So we're really in favor of remediating the canal system and transitioning to cooling towers down at Turkey Point because at this point the contamination is just so far gone, and it's impacting not just our groundwater source but also it's been, our radioactive tracers have been found in Biscayne Bay, which is indicative of the fact that the water is also making its way to the bay. The future outlook. I always feel like the bearer of bad news when it comes to environmental issues in South Florida. Well, I really do think that there is some sort of positive outlook. Biscayne Bay is still one of the healthiest and premier estuaries in the country. However, it's reaching a tipping point. A tipping point is essentially a point of no return. So it's the point at which the entire ecosystem could collapse, or the point at which we could do something about it. We have to continue to study water quality in the habitats of the bay in order to make sure that we don't go past the tipping point. We also have to do our very best to educate our families and our friends to become stewards of our environment and to care about these issues. A lot of people, I'm sure you've seen the news, there are a lot of very pressing things going on in our country today, but this is something that's a little bit more actionable in our own communities back at home that we can really make a difference for ourselves, our communities, the environment, and future generations. So what exactly can you do? Well, of course, you can dispose of your trash and waste in the appropriate containers. I think that goes without saying. You can participate in cleanup events, you can use eco-friendly landscaping, native vegetation in particular is very helpful. You can take steps to reduce your carbon footprint, and there are many more tips online for how you can help us to address stormwater runoff, pollution problems, and climate change in this community. All in all, we all need to work together to support efforts to protect Biscayne Bay, which we believe is a national treasure in our backyard. So that's it from me, but I'm happy to open up the floor to some Q&A. I know you all have a lot of questions. Before we get into that, I will just do a quick briefing of some of the things that we're working on right now at Miami Waterkeeper, because that might stimulate some discussion. So, very recently here on Key Biscayne, we've been working with the council on a straw ban on plastic straws and bioplastic straws. So we're working heavily on marine debris issues with the Key, and they've been leaders on this issue for many years in terms of plastic and protecting water resources and that sort of thing. So we're really excited. That will be coming up for second reading before the Village Council in August, and I'm happy to circulate that information to you all if you would like to come and speak and support the ban. We can definitely use voices of support. We are also working very heavily on wastewater issues. I told my colleague Dana the other day that it's a little bit embarrassing because every time somebody Googles me, all that comes up is Kelly Cox and sewage in Miami. And I'm like, man, I wish I was associated with something a little bit more glamorous. But really, I think that it speaks to the fact that this is such a pervasive issue in Miami. Last summer, for those of you who remember, we received a pollution report from a concerned citizen about an ongoing and prolific sewage leak that was spewing into Biscayne Bay and the Atlantic Ocean for more than a year. Now the citizen had reported it to the county and it had gone unfixed, and that sewage had spewed more than 11 million gallons into this area last summer and before. So part of what we do at Miami Waterkeeper is we use legal advocacy as a tool to effectuate change. That's a really nice way of saying we sue polluters to hold them accountable. So what we ended up doing was filing a notice of intent to sue Miami-Dade County, and within 3 days they plugged that leak. Unfortunately, they haven't issued a permanent fix for the leak quite yet, so we're working on that still. And we're also working on encouraging the county to do continued maintenance of these sewage pipes and infrastructures. There are public pollution notices that are publicly available through the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and I receive them every week, and every week I'm still getting notification of sewage leaks in Miami-Dade County. Maybe not as big as the one that we saw last summer, but sewage leaks nonetheless. And as far as I'm concerned, any sort of sewage, whether it be raw or partially treated, is unacceptable to add to our marine environment or our physical environment where we live and we work and we play. So we're working on wastewater issues. We're also working on wastewater reuse issues. You might remember that I mentioned that Miami-Dade County has to shut down its ocean outfall systems within the next few years, and that's absolutely true. There's also a mandate under that legislation that Miami-Dade County reuse 60% of its wastewater. And that's not just for Miami-Dade County, that's a statewide mandate. As you might venture to guess, Miami-Dade County has not decided how they're going to do that yet. By the 2020, I believe, 2020, maybe 2025 timeline. So we're a little bit behind the times. So we've been working with the County Commission on trying to identify nature-based solutions for treated wastewater. When treated to a very, very, very high level, we believe that we can add additional fresh water into our wetlands to recharge Biscayne Bay and add the appropriate amount of fresh water in quality and in quantity to this ecosystem that is so starved for fresh water. So we're working very heavily on that too. We also work very broadly on a variety of legislative issues, including plastic bag bans, styrofoam bans, straw bans, fracking bans, offshore drilling bans, and things of that nature. We also have other initiatives that are not necessarily policy or legislative related. So we, similar to this program for adults, we also have a junior ambassador program for students, which engages high school students in environmental education and leadership training so they can learn and get involved in the civic engagement process. What else? We also have a variety of volunteer events and other engagement opportunities. Last week, for example, we held a movie screening of Chasing Coral, which is a critically acclaimed film about coral bleaching and decline on the global scale. So we're always doing our very best at Miami Waterkeeper to protect our marine ecosystems and our environment, provide clean water to all of you, and advocate for a more resilient South Florida.
Okay, so sorry, just really quick. First of all, if you haven't seen Chasing Coral, you really should. It's really depressing, but it's a very well-made film. One thing I wanted to mention is for the Citizen Science Project, one of the ways we get funding for events like this is through grants, and currently we're funding this under a grant from the EPA on environmental education. In order to report back to the EPA like how we're doing, I have a survey for you guys to take during Q&A. I'll pass that out. It'll just take you guys 5 minutes, and then once you finish, if you just want to leave it on your chair and I'll collect it later, I'd appreciate it.
Can I answer any questions for you? Yes?
How about the pumping that they're doing on Miami Beach, where they're pumping stormwater out into the bay and the ocean? Is that causing more problems?
It's a good question, and this is something we were actually talking about this morning at a inter-agency meeting just on Virginia Key. Scientists are not really quite sure yet. Part of the issue is that Miami Beach has been testing the various pumping sites and various other sites throughout Miami Beach and the bay in that area. However, they haven't published like a final report of findings yet. So unless you are analyzing their data, it can be very difficult to tell exactly what's in that water. There have been some scientists from FIU and other places who believe that there are increased levels of nutrients and bacteria in that water, just from the nature of it being on the land and also concentrated in very distinct areas throughout the bay. But it's an ongoing question and people are investigating. The pumps themselves are perfectly legal, and we, of course, at Waterkeeper don't want to necessarily impose a chilling effect on these communities that are actually taking action to mitigate for sea level rise and resiliency issues. However, we really do believe that water quality needs to be at the forefront of these discussions, and Miami Beach has been historically very good about working together with us and other community stakeholders to address those types of issues. So once those reports are finalized and scientists reach more of a consensus, I'll be able to answer that question a little bit more clearly. Yes?
Yeah, on that simulation of flooding of Miami, that's a simulation, that's not anything real, right?
Right, that's a simulation.
Because if it were simulated like that, that would indicate that Miami Beach is tilted one direction, to the south. That's not true, is it?
I'm not sure what the...
No, I don't think so. I mean, so that's not a very good rendition. I think that would be exaggeration, gross.
I believe it to be an exaggeration too.
Yeah, I do, because a lot of people would notice it.
Right.
Yeah, I think it should have in big red letters, you know. I guess.
Simulation.
Yeah, not based on fact, actually. Correct.
Sure. Yeah.
The video you had of all the trash that was in the mangrove roots, where was that video taken?
That's a good question. I'm pretty sure it was by Biscayne. Yes.
I have 3 questions.
Yes.
1, do you know what happened in holding the line for 836?
I don't know. I haven't heard yet. I haven't been back in the office today.
Number 2, do you know, or if we still here in Key Biscayne have houses that have not connected to the sewer, that are still in septic tank? Because I think there was a certain year that either you had to connect,
Mm-hmm.
or you sold a house, or something happened to your septic tank, but it would be nice to know, are there still houses in Key Biscayne that are still connected, not connected to sewer?
Don't quote me, but I venture to guess that the answer to
I
that is,
had one.
That you're still in septic?
yeah.
I'm not, yes.
Ah, I thought there was a year that you had to connect.
Certain areas.
Well, at the very least, I can point you in the direction of a Miami-Dade County septic and sewage report that just came out about 2 months ago. And they did provide an update on which areas are on septic and which areas are on sewer, and like how much it's going to cost to transition those places to sewer.
And my 3rd question was, should we recycle in the sense of in the beach? I've seen other municipalities that at the beach, for example, New Smyrna, they have 2 containers. Would that help?
I think that recycling in general helps, but you know the old saying, reduce, reuse, recycle. Recycle is last intentionally because you really need to address the waste stream at the very beginning. So reducing your consumption of those things comes first, reusing them comes next, and then recycling. There is an issue in Miami-Dade County with commercial recycling where there is a capacity issue. So occasionally they reach capacity, so regardless of whether we are recycling here at the beach, they just divert the stream into the landfill either way. And then, you know, for example, foreign countries in some cases are no longer accepting our recyclables. So we're to a point where we really need to start addressing, okay, is recycling really the answer here, or is reducing consumption the answer? Yes?
Kelly, and in your presentation, I would characterize it as a extremely thorough overview of life in the southern waters here, what goes on, and I think it's pretty clear that most of the residents here haven't a clue. Whether they would care or not, if they did have a clue, is what you're working on. But my question is, when you laid out all of these 100-year plans to try to improve things, can you give us an example or two of matters that the Waterways Group has gotten into and were able to be successful in getting change?
Sure. So we have a myriad of success stories. One of our, well, let me give you 2 examples. So in the year 2014, Miami Waterkeeper entered into litigation against the Army Corps of Engineers for the Port of Miami dredging project, which sought to expand and deepen and widen the Port of Miami. In the process, the Army Corps, through its contractor, accidentally smothered 250 acres or more of our coral reefs in Miami. So we brought an Endangered Species Act lawsuit. But in the process, our litigation catalyzed the rescue of many what are called corals of opportunity, so corals that were threatened by the dredging sediment, which resulted in what the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration deems to be more than $14 million in public benefit. So we're really proud of being able to save those corals, and that's a really actionable success story that we have. More recently, and as recent as 2016, the state of Florida issued a rule promulgation where they were attempting to increase the permissible levels of toxic chemicals in our surface waters through a change in the human health toxics criteria rule. And we worked with municipalities, including the village of Key Biscayne, which issued a resolution opposing that rule change because it would unnecessarily expose us as humans recreating in surface waters and also fisheries and through fish consumption to high levels of toxic carcinogenic chemicals. So things like benzene were being considered in this rule change. And the point of that rule change, you might say, okay, well, why would the state want to increase levels of toxic chemicals in the waterways? And it's really to accommodate industry and business and what we believe to be particularly the fracking industry in the state of Florida. So we did a lot of advocacy and rallied the community through petitions and phone banks and emails and working with municipalities and other stakeholders. And we were eventually able to facilitate that rule being pulled just a few months ago, which is another great success story. And so now the state of Florida is going to go back and redo its risk analyses and take a harder look at fish consumption data and really decide, okay, what are the actual permissible levels of chemicals that we're going to be allowing in our waterways?
Good job.
Thank you.
Has there been any talk to replace the sewer plant up at Jimmy Key? Because I think it's beyond patching.
I agree. I don't know about replacing it. It seems like they're retrofitting it. That's the plan. And my understanding is that the ocean outfall system is going to remain operational in the event that there are emergency uses needed.
What is that?
Your guess is as good as mine.
Intuitively, the idea of sending treated sewage deep seems dangerous and probably bad in the long term. And the alternative that is logical is to simply extend the pipes further out into the ocean. And I'm sure that was considered. Can you comment on that?
I'm not sure what plans were considered in terms of feasibility. What I do know is that when some of these projects are considered, they're based off of sort of antiquated feasibility study instructions, in some cases that are many decades old. And what that does is it limits the economic valuation and in turn the feasibility of a project because they're not considering multiple bottom line benefits like reduction of marine pollution or water quality or resiliency-based projects and those types of things. So it means that in the long run, the projects that are deemed feasible are the cheapest projects, which turns out to be the deep well injection projects. So that's sort of where we're at, and it seems to me, after taking a harder look at these issues, that we need some regulation changes up at the state level.
Like what?
Like updating the feasibility analysis to permit multiple bottom line benefits. So assigning a number value to a resilient coastline, for example. So having restoring a historic wetland ecosystem would provide a resiliency dividend for coastal communities, but that's not quantifiable in the feasibility analysis as it's currently written. So, so you have to sort of put a number on some of these things in order for them to be considered. It's tough.
Excuse me, I actually just have two comments,
Sure.
slash stories. What you were talking about earlier as far as Florida, they were considering that rule about letting more toxins like benzene and things into the water, and now they're reconsidering that. That's really exciting actually, because aside from the fact it's really hard to get them to change their mind, if like you obviously you end up with issues where fish, as they're swimming through the water, they breathe the water essentially, so they end up taking in a lot of the stuff. And I'm from northern Indiana, and what you may not know is that they actually stock some of the rivers up there with salmon, and salmon's life cycle is they're born in freshwater, go out to the ocean and come back. In Indiana, they're born in freshwater, they go to Lake Michigan and come back. But because of actually runoff in Lake Michigan and the lead content, they tell you that you're allowed to, obviously they stop them, so you're allowed to fish the salmon, but they give you a very specific limit of like 2 or 3 pounds a month that you're allowed to eat because there's too much lead in it. So rather than actually regulating and stopping the lead from being pumped into Lake Michigan, they're like, yeah, just eat less fish.
That's one approach, I suppose.
Right, yeah, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. And then the other comment back to where somebody was asking about having recycle bins out like on the beach and things like that. It's kind of, you have to kind of look at the cost benefit of it, because one thing that people will complain about is that it looks unsightly to have more bins and things around, But then recently, and I can't remember who I heard this from, it might have been you, Terry, when Irma came through, at Bill Bags, they removed all the trash cans from the beach, obviously because they didn't want them blown around everywhere. And it took them a while to put them back. I don't know if they even have yet. Yeah, and there's a reason for that, because they found that people actually left less trash on the beach when there were no trash cans around. So yeah, when the trash cans are there, then they're just like, oh, it's fine, there's trash cans, I'll just throw it here or next to it or something, and then it gets blown around and moved, and people just seem to think like, oh, well, this is here, so it matters less. And then when there isn't actually a place to put it, they take it with them or they bring less. So it's one of those things where you have to kind of look at each situation and see like what would work best.
I have one more question. In your role as nonprofits or advocates or however, do you take positions or do you get involved with the dialogue that takes place, for example, in the county, in the city, and right now across the village of Key Biscayne about most of these issues? And I go to almost every council meeting when all of these things are being discussed, and I think your folks show up every once in a while, but I don't get the sense that the people who run the village, okay, who are responsible for this, have much of a relationship with you folks. Now, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't sense that your advocacy helps guide some of these communities towards the solution they need.
I appreciate the constructive criticism, but I'll respectfully disagree. We do a lot of behind-the-scenes work, and we're a pretty small staff. We just hired our 4th full-time staff person, and our entire jurisdiction encompasses Miami-Dade and Broward County. So I think that we're actually pretty effective given our capacity. And we do have relationships with folks here on the Village Council, and Miami-Dade County, and a variety of municipalities. We're obviously not perfect, right? I mean, we could really use some support to grow, so if any of you would like to make a contribution to Miami Waterkeeper, by all means, we'll hire some more staffers and get them out lobbying elected officials.
I'm not asking you to be defensive. I am trying to figure out ways to encourage the community management here to be able to use your expertise and resources in a more effective and efficient manner than I am able to see. It's not the question of, whether you have an ongoing dialogue with Melissa. That's not the point. The point is anybody listening to what you have to say so that the product that's coming forward for the community has your real input in it?
And I appreciate that, absolutely. I mean, we certainly are doing the best we can. As I mentioned, there's always room for improvement. Part of what we do is trying to increase our online presence so that our materials are readily available to folks everywhere. So if they're Googling about Biscayne Bay and water quality, we're one of the first results to pop up. And we also do targeted outreach to elected officials, particularly those that we might not work with more as frequently, especially we tend to have very good relationships with elected officials in coastal communities, but we're trying to really increase our impact with elected officials in inland communities because they do have a lot of buy-in and power as well. So one of our programs that we run is our Day on the Bay program, and we hold boat tours for elected officials and community leaders and decision makers. So we strategically invite them onto a county vessel that we leave out of Crandon Park. And we do these again multiple times throughout the year. We talk about the most pressing issues facing Biscayne Bay. We spoon feed them ordinances and resolutions, and we really facilitate our advocacy efforts in that way. So there's certainly room to grow. And in fact, I commend my staff for the impact that we have, being so small. But absolutely, I agree. I think that there could also be something to be said for elected officials taking a little bit more stake in these issues and seeking out the information themselves. For the most part, they're pretty educated folks, and this should definitely be on their radar. Yeah.
I think we can always ask our council members and manager and staff if they've spoken to you too. You know, we can bring it up. My other question was about the Marine Stadium, the boat show. As I recall, you all were part of testifying at the county commission and were against it. Am I correct?
That might have been before my time at Waterkeeper. I'm not super sure. I know that Waterkeeper came under new leadership in 2014.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the prior
My
position was.
question is, has there been any follow-up in terms of what having the boat show has done to the bay and to the basin of Marine Stadium, and how much seagrass they've killed, and etc.?
I'm not super sure about what studies have been done. That might be a better question for the Biscayne Bay Aquatic Preserves people, or the folks that are a little bit more active on that issue. But I do know that the boat show is a huge economic driver, and I've encountered many conversations with elected officials where they think that it's a cost-benefit analysis, I suppose. But we're obviously in favor of protecting the marine ecosystems, but we're also in favor of folks having access to the water. So I don't know that, and this is just me spitballing, I don't know that it should be completely closed off to recreation. I know like the rowing club is in there all the time and that sort of thing, but there are definite impacts to that Benthic community there, and I think it's been pretty historically deteriorated, I believe, since it was dredged initially. So I'm not super sure how to answer that, but that's all I got.
My understanding is also that there is a threat going to when they have, which I encourage people to go and attend to, when they have the Virginia Key group. We have Joe Rasco representing Dade County, but Key Biscayne, and we have Bob Vernon representing Key Biscayne. Very interesting, and there is that active group of rowers, or they are trying to care for their city of Miami wants to allow X amount of boats to be able to moor there. The question is do they pump their whatever?
And there are, I believe, like monthly or every other month meetings of the Virginia Key Advisory Board through the city of Miami, and those types of issues will be on their agenda for sure, and be something they'll be more intimately familiar with.
In defense of your program, I think it's been very effective.
Thank you.
With the school, the Key Biscayne Elementary School, and some of the other schools, and the senior group of ASK has been participating in the citizen scientist with the foundation. So we are involved. It's just maybe not as vocal a group as one would see. And we've also approached CVS and the Winn-Dixie store about the plastic bags 1,000 times, and we've given out bags and we designed bags, and it doesn't seem to go anywhere. But they do have paper straws now in Winn-Dixie, which is amazing. So there are small steps.
Exactly, yeah, it's the minor victories. It's like they say, you can dump one big rock into a pool and it'll create a really big ripple, or if everybody tosses a rock in, it'll also create a big ripple.
Can I end? I don't know if you're going to end, but there was this wonderful video of toilets in Japan now, where you wash your hands above the toilet, and that water then goes into the tank of the toilet and it's reused. So, I mean, there's some really cool, innovative things that we could do if we just wanted to, I think.
Absolutely, yeah, it's all about political will and community will behind these issues.
You mentioned that you're supported by a grant. I don't know if that's, what is that, county or state?
It's an EPA grant, it's a federal grant.
Okay. Are you actively seeking other grants?
We do, yes. We have a very diversified funding stream at Miami Waterkeeper. We are supported by federal grants, community-based grants, private foundation grants. We have a membership program that has a variety of membership levels. Our members actually give us standing to bring our lawsuits, so they're pretty critical to the operation of the organization. And then, of course, we have generous donations from individuals and some seldom corporate sponsors too. Every year we host a signature event called Bay Day, where we have a very affordable community event that allows for kayaking and sailing and boat tours, food and drink and music and all of that, right in Shake a Leg and Coconut Grove. So we regularly seek corporate sponsors for those types of things. Other questions? Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We're so grateful.